Hello guys, and welcome to a new series by me, Cepheid, Mastering the Craft. This is a video series that I've wanted to do for a little while, making videos helping people with specific problems they have in Warcraft 3. So that would be, in this case, scouting with human. So this video series will rely on you, the viewer. What I would really like is any requests from viewers. If you want to put in the comments, or if you want to get me on the gym Discord or on Twitter, I'll put a link to any of these below. If you want to contact me and ask me about specific things that you're struggling with, I will consider making a video about it. And don't worry, because I have literally nothing in my pile at the minute. So if you get in there early, it's quite likely you could be in the next video. Your request. Now, this video is from Floss 2 times daily, who asks about scouting. He plays human and he thinks that his scouting is poor, and that he wants some help understanding what he should be doing to improve that. So that is what we're going to have a look at today through a bunch of videos, including replays, including one of Floss's games. So let's get straight into that. So going into our first game, this is a human mirror on Terranistan with our hero Floss playing the top left. I'll try and skip through this as quickly as possible. We don't want to waste time just looking at the start of these build-ups. We're going to try and watch with the fog of war on as much as possible. Sorry. First thing we're going to see about scouting is that Floss sends a footman. So this is quite common for humans to do nowadays. They just send their first footman for a scout. First of all, he sees that there is a Mountain King. He sees that there's quite a heavy base build, but unfortunately, he doesn't really see much about the tech plan. So I would have liked him to send that footman a bit further in before he sent it back. Also, it wouldn't have been terrible to leave the footman sort of loitering around. I've noticed that some pros do this actually. But either way, we know that based on his scouting, it's absolutely safe for Floss to do a fair amount of creeping. And that's what he does. He does this, and then he does this, and then he does this, which will give you level 3. So, as any human worth their salt knows, these 3 creep camps will give you level 3. And it's quite a good assumption to make that the human that Floss is playing against, the MK player, is also doing this creep pattern, because that is, naturally good level 3. But of course we don't know, because Floss has not seen what's going on. So at this minute, all Floss knows is that the guy was starting creeping there, and that's it. That's all we know, and he had an MK. So it would have been good probably to send another scout now. What actually Floss does, by the looks of it, is send his entire army. He makes an assumption that his opponent was also doing the same creep route as him, and goes to here to try and attack it, which is fair enough if that were the case, but he doesn't actually have the information to know whether this is what is happening, so it's a little bit of a waste of time. He does see his opponent come here, and because he ran down this place on the map, this does actually give you a bit of information. Even if you're not scouting, even if your opponent just runs into your base, you should be able to make some basic assumptions about what they've been doing. If you get a chance to look at their items, which I didn't here because we were going at fast speed, but if we were at 1 speed, I probably would have quickly looked and seen what his MK's items were, which is always what you should do. As soon as you see your opponent come out of a period where you haven't seen them for very long, is look what their items are. That should be something you always do. That is a form of scouting in effect. But anyway, back to the point. Even if you just see your opponent's army here, you can make some assumptions. Either he came this route to run over to here, or he came this route to run over to here. Came along this path, or came along this path, because Floss went this path. So we know that he hasn't been creeping this side of the map. That's one thing we know. The MK has not been creeping that side of the map, which is good for Floss now, because Floss has a lot of map control over this side of the map, which is good. But that also means he's given up a lot of map control over here. So that's roughly what we can say about this game. And because Floss has already seen that this has not been creeped, and he right now sees with the War Elemental this has not been creeped. I didn't see if this one had been or not, but that doesn't really matter, because the most important 2 creep camps here haven't. So if you were able to pause the game, which obviously you can't in a real game, and think about what we know now, we know that the MK has, if he has been, using his time even remotely sensibly by actually, creeping, we can make an assumption he's crept this, and then when he came up here, you got 2 choices really. Either creep these 2 greens, which actually looks quite likely at this point. It looks quite likely that he's creeped these 2 greens and then just ran up here and attacked. or he could have crept any of these creep camps. Now, because there's two real options here, and because even if you didn't think about it this carefully, you need to know that you haven't got much map control over here, and that there is an expansion here. So an expansion is a possibility, so it would be very sensible at some point in the near future to scout this area, because it's the area of the map that you know the least about. All you know is that he hasn't been here, and he hasn't been here. That's all you know. So has he done this creep camp? Has he done this? Has he done this? Has he done either of these two? Who knows? But then we get into a battle. He walks into him. Now, often in a when you come straight into a battle, it's often not easy. But we want to click on the MK, and this, looking at his items, it tells a story about where he's been. So he's got two of the first. I can't remember if it's level 1 or 2 permanent items, but these two drop from the same creep camp, and these two drop from the same creep camp, and this one as well. Now, the Gauntlets of Ogre's Strength, they drop from this creep camp, and I'm pretty sure this one as well. I might be wrong on that one. But the Claws of Attack and the Circlets, they drop from these two creep camps. And I'm trying to think if maybe on the side ones as well. But no, I don't think so. I think there's somewhere else on the map where it's either this one or this one. I think drops 2 items. I can't remember now exactly. But what I do know is these two in the middle drop the level 2 permanent items, which are the Circlet, the Claws, the Ring, or the Gloves of Haste. So if you were to stop time again, you can't do this in a battle. But what this story tells you is, oh, I also forgot to mention that the invulnerability potion came from this creep camp. It can also, as Floss has demonstrated, come from this creep camp. So we know that the human has creeped this for sure. This possibly, or this, but not both, and these two creep camps. So if we took the Fog of War off right now, we saw that this one's been creeped, this one's been creeps. I seem to remember now in the back of my head that actually this creep camp drops the invulnerability and also the Cloak of Shadows level drop, and not this one. So you see I was correct in assuming that one of these two had been creeped but didn't know which. This one's been done, and this one's been done as well. So there we go. That's how you can know where your opponent has been on the map. Now, naturally, it's very difficult to just look, and it's very difficult to just remember all these things. This comes with time, and it comes with actually looking in the map editor, and it comes with playing a lot of games. But what I would suggest more than anything else is just paying attention while you're playing, paying attention to what items you are getting from what creep camp. And then when you know about these patterns and you start actually paying attention to them, then you can start making this kind of scouting. So we know where this MK has been. I mean, maybe Floss doesn't because he doesn't know all of what I described, but that information is available to you if you want to learn it. You could have known exactly where this MK has been. And even based on the timing that he came here, you can make an assumption that he creeped this, and then he went here, and then he went to here. And if I watch the replay back, in fact, we'll do that right now. We'll watch the replay back just to assume that I'm right, because I would like to demonstrate that this is how you can make assumptions about what your opponent's doing. So the MK, and as well, Floss already saw that he'd gone to this creep camp. So then he does this one, and then he does the bottom one, and then he does the top one, and then he goes to attack Floss's base. There we go. So you could see, based on his items, we've got a good idea of where he went. So now we get into this battle now, and we'll switch back to Floss for Fog. So paying attention to where the items drop, that will give you a good idea of where your opponent's been, and therefore where your opponent will be. Because when you think about, after this battle's over, once this battle's done, whatever resolves, assuming that it doesn't, end the game, your opponent's going to go back to creeping. Where do you think they're going to go? They're going to probably, they've got a lot of map control in this area, so this is a good area to keep scouting. So when you go back to your creeping, you want to maybe send a footman, make sure that they're not expanding. Floss as well knows that these two creep camps haven't been done, so if Floss was to play on this side of the map, which he will do in a bit, it's quite easy to come and creepjack or be creepjacked on this side of the map. So when Floss sent this, he told me that actually what had happened in this game that made him think his scouting was terrible is that he got creepjacked doing this creep camp. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And we'll see if that was something that was just unlucky or could have been avoided. So right now we don't know where the MK is, but what assumption we can make is that he is either going to do these two, which are quite high value targets, or he's going to come over here and do some creeping over here. So we can make some basic assumptions. You might say that they could do this side of the map, but I think that would be quite risky. And it's not to say that the human player won't do that, but that is quite risky. It might even be quite a good play if your opponent, if you were to come down here and you were to see a load of corpses because your opponent's just creeped that. That would be quite frustrating because it's like, yep, fair enough, you've took some map control where you had it. But fortunately, he gets Wand of Illusion and he sends it down here, and sees that he is currently creeping that. He also noticed that he goes Rifleman, so he can make some assumptions about his tech as well, because Riflemen don't come out of nowhere. And then when he does actually see the tech, he sees that it looks pretty standard rifle caster. He's got some Riflemen, he's got some casters, and he's got an MK and a Blood Mage, because he did actually, I didn't show it there, but at 1x speed it would have been quite easy to see that he had a Blood Mage there. So you get a good sense of what your opponent's army is going to be like now, what they're going to do, what the plan is, and also, again, because you saw them there, it is quite sensible to do this creep camp. You've got a lot of space. That is another thing about scouting, is it will tell you when it is safe to creep and where it is safe to creep. So he has this creep camp available to him quite nicely, and that is a very high value creep camp because some of the stuff you can get, like the Soapy Mask, is pretty good. So you do want to make sure you don't let your opponent take that off you. Now, here we go with the scouting issue. He says he does this creep. Now, one thing I will say, when you're doing a creep like this, even if you had vision and you knew that he wasn't here, it would have been very sensible to pull this creep back. Just hit it with the Archmage, pull it back, turn the Archmage around, summon a Water Elemental, and that will have all these units attacking here. And if your army's here and the units are here, think about what next happens and how much different that would be. So imagine, instead of fighting here, we're actually fighting here. Because out of the blue he comes, and because Floss saw him doing this creep camp, I mean, it's pretty sensible to assume that he did this one next. I don't know if he did or not. It doesn't look like he did because he doesn't have the item for it. But you would assume he'd do this creep camp, he'd do this creep camp, and then the next nearest is actually this one. So it's not entirely impossible that the MK player would come this way. So yeah, I mean, this is not a bad creep camp to take. It's like quite a contested creep camp, as I mentioned. It's not stupid for the MK player to come this way. So if you can take this camp, that's pretty good. But contested creep camps are risky. He does get it. He doesn't have space on his MK for the Potion of Greater Mana. I actually think using either of these items, especially the healing scroll right now, would be really good, and then picking that up. But the heat of the game, these things happen, and it is very sad because you don't really want to give an MK a Greater Mana Potion. But yeah, anyway, so that would have went better, I think, if he was there, and also it wouldn't have been terrible to send a footman there because you could have used the MK to quickly bolt the creep to finish off the creep really quickly. That's one thing you could do. Yeah. So, was that a scouting problem? Maybe. I mean, I mentioned a lot of stuff about how you can make some assumptions based on where your opponents went, but he did see his opponent was there, so he knew his opponent wasn't, up here, for example, which would have made it very safe to do. So he was knowingly doing this camp at a very risky camp, which is fine. But if you're going to do a camp that is very risky, you need to pull it back. And that map awareness of where your opponent is likely to be will help you decide when that should happen. Now, the rest of this game, there's not much to learn from. But for the sake of closure, I'll tell you that Floss eventually loses the game. Mainly due to that fight that you just saw there really quickly. I actually don't think, even at this point in the game, he's entirely out of it. Because he has, the level 3 MK. Well, he gets it quite quickly after this comes back. But yeah, I don't think, and the Archmage MK and Paladin combo is pretty good. Anyway, against MK Blood Mage, in my opinion. Anyway, so that's the first one we'll look at. We'll go on to the next replay now, which will be a pro replay. So this is a game between Hawk and Lawlight. We'll watch from Hawk's point of view, with as much Fog of War as we can. And I wanted to look at this because I thought this was a good example of scouting specifically for something that you want a very binary yes or no answer to. And this is a very good way to think about scouting, especially early on in your Warcraft career, is you want to be thinking, I want to know this. And so you send a scout, in this case you'll send a footman, and you want to know specifically that thing. and we'll look at what that is in a minute. So at the moment, he doesn't know anything about Lorelei. He hasn't seen anything apart from one wisp. He's gone for a Mountain King first, which, as I mentioned in the last game, the strength of the Mountain King is that you're going to get a quick level 3, which means you are going to be pretty much focusing on your own game, and it kind of doesn't matter what your opponent's doing, because your gambit is, I'm going to get level 3 fairly quickly, and then we'll talk about being aggressive on the map. So what you would expect based on that is that when the MK hits 3 or is 3 or is shortly before 3, that's when they'll want to know what's going on the map. So what we'll see now is he's going to scout now at this point. So this is the first time he even sees what hero there is. And again, the good thing about looking at pro replays is that you'll pretty much be certain that they'll be thinking about things like what I mentioned in the last game about the Circle of Nobility. He'll know where that drops, and he'll be thinking about that. Now, that drops, looking at these two items from memory, that drops from this creep camp and this creep camp. So I think maybe there's another one as well. But also, on Echoals it gets a bit muddy because you can buy from the marketplace. I believe it drops from this one as well. So looking at that, what he could know at the minute is not very much. So he doesn't know very much except that he's been to the shop because he sees a staff in the dust. So at the moment, we still don't really know much about what Lorelei is doing, but it is a bit unusual to go Warden, so okay, fair enough. He's sending this footman to scout, though, because he saw the circlet as well, but he already wanted to scout, but because he saw the circlet, he could suspect this creep camp has been creeped. But what he specifically wants to know is my opponent expanding? Is that what's happening? I need to know, and I need to know how far along it is. So he specifically wants to know how far along is my opponent's expansion, if there is one. So he goes to here, he sees it's not been creeped yet, and he then goes to the typical spot where a lot of Night Owls build their expansion. He sees it's just completed now. So at this stage, there's a bit of a clock that's likely in Hawk's head now. He knows that once this tree comes up, they will uproot it, they'll walk it all the way down here, and then they have to creep this creep camp. That is the fastest way to expand, is to build your tree of life and then walk it to the expansion, because you can't build it directly next to the creeps, it'll get cancelled. So Hawk now knows what stage the expansion is at, and that's just specifically for this footman, and we'll see how he uses that information. Now, obviously, he's in a bit of pressure at the minute, so he has to defend his expansion as well. But obviously, the goal of this will be to kill his opponent's expansion while not losing his own. So, this footman still not doing very much. He's just going to heal this wisp. So, what will he do now? He's got access to the merc camp. So he's got a merc. So he's got a fair amount of damage. So he's going to grab Boots of Speed so that he can chase down the Warden. And he's going to go and attack this expansion. So where do we think, right, based on what I said before, where do we think that this Tree of Life is? It was there, it was complete. We saw, the footman saw it was there just a second ago. I mean, we could even make a guess at whereabouts, how far along it is. Do we think here or think here? It's definitely on the way, isn't it? I mean, you don't get a player like Lorelei build an expansion and then just forget about it and go, oops, I forgot about that when they get to tier 2. So we know that the expansion is en route. And it's very easy for us in our neutral position when we're not playing the game to think about it like this. It's very easy to think, well, yeah, okay, I saw that. So it'll probably be on the way somewhere. It'll be somewhere here. But of course, Hawk has played thousands of games. He knows this is the kind of thing that happens. He probably even knows that Lorelei does this specific thing quite a lot, because actually I've watched a few Lorelei games on Echo Owls, and Lorelei does this quite a lot. So when he plays on the right-hand side position, it seems to be a common build that he does. So let's have a look. Oh, there it is, right there. Look, see, we guessed where it was. Hawk will have had a good idea of where it was as well. So this isn't luck that he walked into this. Hawk knew this was here, and he probably had a good sense that this army would have been good enough to kill it. So that's all I really want to show in this game. The rest of the game is, there's not really much to talk about on scouting, but that is a good example where you are looking for something specific, and then you use that information in a positive way in the future. So he scouted for the expansion, he spotted the expansion, and then he knew roughly the timing that was best to attack. It may have even been better to let Hawk start that creep camp, but maybe not. I don't know. Lorelei, sorry. But anyway, that's all the example I want to look at on this one. Quick, short and sweet one. But I hope that's a demonstration of kind of the way that you can think about a game and scouting, that you can take information that you see and act on it, because that's the other half of scouting. Is one, you get information, but if you don't know how to process that, then you don't get anything out of it. There's no point in even scouting, which is why often you'll hear quite good players say to new players, don't bother with scouting when you first learn the game, because you won't know what you're looking for. You won't know what any of the information you get means. So just concentrate on your build order. It's better if you just don't use a peasant or a footman and use that for creeping or whatever. And many players will get to the point where they'll lose games because they didn't know what was happening, what their opponent was doing, and that's the point where you need to learn scouting. But obviously, you've not done any scouting, you don't know anything about it, and you need to start thinking about the game like this. You need to start thinking about what's happening in the fog of war, because, I mean, it's easy to say that obviously things are happening in the fog of war that you can't see, but it's very easy, and I know it's very easy in a game to forget about everything that's not happening in your immediate vision, or even just in immediately what you're actually looking at on the screen on the actual sort of in the window in front of you. So good players do think like this. They look for specific things that they know timings for, and make decisions on what to do based on that. So Hawk was able to destroy this expansion specifically for that. So yeah, that's all I want to look at in this game. So I will see you in the next game. The next game I want to look at is Grubby versus Thorzin. This was gameplay a little while ago. I think it was a show match, but I'm not sure. There's some observers, so I think that's the case. Again, we're going to try and watch from Thorzin's point of view. The last one that we looked at, the Hawk versus Lawliot, that was specifically about looking for something incredibly specific and reacting to it. This game will be more about tracking your opponent, so you have a good sense of what they've been doing on the map, so that you know what you can then do. We'll see both good and bad in this game. We'll see cases where Thorzin keeps very good track of what Grubby's movement is, and has, and again we're going to use that sense of predicting what's happening in the fog of war based on what we've seen, and based on some sensible assumptions. And that's a good way to think about the game, because obviously you won't be right every time, but if you can make those sensible assumptions, you'll get, for the most part, you'll not be surprised by what your opponent's doing. And so that is another goal of scouting, is to not be surprised, to effectively always know what your opponent's doing. And so we're going to watch as Thorzin gives us a masterclass on how to do that. So we'll fast forward a bit to where it gets interesting. And the heroes come out. For reference, by the way, if you guys watch YouTube videos of streams or whatever, pretty much always it's about 2 minutes when heroes come out, so you can just skip straight to 2 minutes in like YouTube videos. I do that as well with like with when I'm watching Grubby or Todd games or whatever on YouTube. Just skip straight to the 2 minutes 15-second mark. That's when the heroes come out and they're actually doing something. Because you know, when you've watched a million games, that's a sort of you sort of forget about that. Anyway, while I was talking there, I actually missed what the scouting that Thorzin did, which was with his first footman. So we'll go back to that. We'll speed it up. Which a footman come out, and he sends a footman straight up the map to see what's going on. This is quite common, as I mentioned. We'll see what he sees. So he sees immediately that, first of all, there's a Farseer. That's good to know. Farseer and Blade Master, both valid. I would say this is probably one map where it could be an absolute toss-up. Both are very good on this map. And we see exactly what he's creeping. And you remember I mentioned I would have liked to have seen Floss keep his footman around for a little bit longer. That's exactly what Thorzin does. So Thorzin's doing just some safe creeping. This is a good creep route to remember on Concealed Hill, doing this one and then this one, because this one has a chance to drop a Tome of Experience, which is very nice. So he's tracking the army. He sees that Grubby goes this way. If you know Concealed Hill, which Thorzin does, the sensible assumption is that Grubby is creeping this, because it's a fairly easy camp, especially with what Grubby has. So Thorzin has a very good sense. He'll be certain pretty much that Grubby is creeping this camp. And if we go like this, we see he's on the way there. And then if we wait a few seconds, we see that Grubby is definitely doing that camp. So you can make sensible assumptions like that. He's even confirming the footman, because actually he plans to, creep Jack. So perhaps even Thorzin did this creep route specifically because he knew that this was quite likely, and that he wanted to come and creep Jack Grubby and prevent him from taking this camp. So he manages to creep a camp while also creep jacking. And that's not necessarily scout, that's more like build ordering, but he kept tabs for the footman. There's two ways really to think about that. One, this is iterated over many, many games, and Thorzane knows that it's possible to do this, to creep this one, and then quite likely to creep jack here. Especially if your opponent opens with this creep camp. That's probably quite sensible. Perhaps if Grubby had opened with this creep camp, then Thorzane, or went straight here, Thorzane might have done a different creep pattern. Now, I mentioned we're going to see the good and the bad. Right now, Thorzane has completely lost track of the map. He doesn't know where Grubby is. He killed a grunt, which is great. That's very good. That's a great start, even though I didn't get the experience. He lost a footman and killed a grunt, even though he didn't get the XP for the grunt. That does hurt the orc a lot. So that was very good. But he's completely lost track of where Grubby is on the map now. And you remember I mentioned if you think it's likely you're going to get creep jacked, you should pull the creep camp. And that is not what Thorzane does here. So I would say, in my humble opinion, that Thorzane could have done this a bit better. Unfortunately, because, I could cheat like that because I'm making the video, he actually gets punished by it. He gets creep jacked. And that is because he lost track of where Grubby was on the map. And fortunately for Thorzane, he won't make that mistake for the rest of the game, because the rest of the game is going to be a masterclass in exactly knowing where the orc army is. And I want to point out that he still hasn't even looked at Grubby's base. He didn't know if he did one burrow tech, if he did two burrow tech, if he did a fast shop, because Grubby hasn't had any shop items yet. He doesn't even know if he's built a shop yet. I mean, you can assume that the orc has built a shop by now, but he didn't know if he did it before teching. So then he doesn't know what the timing is for the tier 2 buildings. Now, again, just using meta knowledge, you can know that it's pretty likely if you see a Farseer, you're going to see Wyverns or Windriders. Right now, he has a really good vision on the map. He's able to see pretty much everywhere, and he knows that his opponent is creeping here, finishing that creep camp off, so he has a good sense of where his opponent is, and he knows exactly where he's going to go after here. He's converging 3 units onto it, so that's good. He sends his Archmage up. He still has good tracking of where Grubby is, and he of course sees the Naga Sea, which is the second hero. Now it's interesting because I think perhaps this was a bit opportunistic by Grubby. He saw that he was sort of on the way across the map, and that there was a chance to attack, possibly. I don't know on that one, but this is again a timing. I'm quite impressed, really, that Thorzane seems to have pretty much predicted the build that Grubby was doing. So I guess Thorzane is used to playing against Windriders, and he just straight up went for the plan to counter Windriders, the timing to cancel the bestiary, and to attack at this point. So he has a good sense, again, still keeping track of where this army was. It didn't matter where it was down here because it TP'd away. So Thorzane will go and creep something else, I believe now. He's lost track slightly, but he's at least seeing the vision. So right now he's lost track, but it's sometimes necessary in order to creep some creeps. And when he doesn't have vision, he's creeping quite a small map, quite a small one. So we saw the wolf come this direction. We know therefore that Grubby is probably on this side of the map. So that is helping Thorzane decide where to send that illusion. So he's sending the illusion out. So we can make probably the assumption that he's either doing the fountain, the expo. That's the only real options, because I think this creep camp was already taken. So it's one of these two, possibly that tiny green there, but it doesn't seem worth it. Or a very cheeky and very early steal of that creep camp, but that seems very unlikely. That seems like it would be very risky. Thorzane seems to know best, so he sends to the expo. So he's made some basic assumptions there. By going here to creep, if you look at what's available on the map, you can make some assumptions about where your opponent might be, so you can make your scouting more efficient. Because I would say, if you had the choice between either scouting your opponent's base or scouting your opponent's army, I'd say most of the time it's better to scout your opponent's army, because that gives you a lot more information. It gives you some information about their tech, like in this case, if you only see, like, he saw a raider and 2 grunts, so he knows that there's no Windriders out yet, because you can't make a raider and ensnare and Windriders this quickly. He saw that there isn't any kind of mass grunt shaman push or anything like that. I mean, he of course did see that there was no spirit lodge or anything, but by looking at the army, you get a sense of what the tech is and what you're going to have to deal with in the late game. But anyway, what I meant to talk about is, if you know the creep camps, you can make some basic assumptions about where it's likely your opponent will be on the map. And you have to think like this. You have to think, what is it likely my opponent's doing? Where did I last see them? How long ago was that? And where would you go if you were playing the Orc at that point? So Thorzane, of course, saw him. I think it was around about here on the map where he saw him. He had a sort of brief fight here, TP back here, and then he ran across this way. So he last saw the Orc somewhere around here on the map. Now there isn't really anything creepy. He's already creeped here. This would be a camped creep, and of course the red, he could steal the red. But if you last see your opponent here, you have to assume when they don't follow you to engage that they're probably creeping nearby. So that's why he sends the illusion up and he spots it right here. So that's roughly, I'd guess, what Thorzane was thinking when he sent the illusion there. And of course, the wolf coming sort of around these trees in this direction pretty much confirms that. At that stage, I might, if I was Thorzane, be a little worried that the red was being done. So what I probably would have done if it was me, and I had the sort of wherewithal to think about this deeply in the game, which is not likely, but if I had, I might have considered putting the illusion up here, just to check that the red wasn't being stolen, and then moving along to where he takes it to here. So that would have been a slightly more efficient scouting. Now he sends the illusion up, and I think at this stage, I think I know exactly what he's looking for here. I think he's looking for Wind Riders, because the timing is too good on this. He sees the first Wind Rider come out, and then the second Wind Rider come out as well. So he has some excellent information about whether he's about to get attacked now or not. He saw that the Orc was creeping here, and then once he knew that, he knew that he wouldn't have any more information about what was happening next. And so I think if you look at what happened there, the Orc went this way. I think we can probably guess that one of two things is going to happen next. Either the Orc is going to go for the Health Fountain. Well, one of three things potentially. The Health Fountain, the red camp here, or attack. And attacking actually, I would say, includes taking this creep camp as well, because that is a very aggressive move to try and take that creep camp. And because Grubby has sent a scout, we'll talk about the Orc scouting, I suppose, for a moment as well. Grubby has been sending wolves. He has a good sense of where Thorzane's army is. So he knows that Thorzane is very far away. So perhaps he could steal, I would say steal, but this creep camp is pretty, if you look at the map, it's generally speaking, this Health Fountain is more under the control of the South player than it is the North player. The opposite is true, obviously, of this one. So to take this would probably be roughly good, and I think Grubby is maybe he'd be thinking that we want to trade the creep camps of the Health Fountains, but we'll see. But Grubby has seen that Thorzane is here, and Thorzane has seen that Grubby is roughly here. So there's a few things that Grubby could do. Again, Wolf's still there. So we have lost track of it, but Thorzane does have an illusion out there looking for it. He does see a unit there, hopefully. And he does send a Hawk out, which is obviously really good when you've got the Beastmaster, as the Hawk can help you with this. So, as I mentioned earlier, he had sort of three options. I think it's a lot of things that could happen. Like he could have went to this Health Fountain, he could have done the red, he could have done this creep camp, and he could have just straight up attacked. I think straight up attacked is the least likely, but you see that you look at, you've got four options there, one of which is probably very unlikely. Two, maybe even, it's probably quite unlikely that he's going to attack this as well. So you can make some sort of, fairly good guesses about what your opponent's doing, and if you are quick enough at scouting this sort of thing, you can creep jacket and take advantage of it. So this kind of thinking is why new players might think that stronger players are map hacking. That's not the case. It's just sensible assumptions and good timing on your scouting can tell you pretty much where your opponent is, even if you can't see them. And of course, items as well. Because if you see the items, you know where your opponent hasn't been, and therefore where they're likely to go in the future. So this is another good use. Thorzane scouted here, saw that the army was going this way, so therefore he knew there was a creep jack opportunity, which is nice. And actually, pulling the creep camp away here, this is one of the creep camps where it's not as beneficial to pull the creeps, because naturally standing near the Health Fountain is really good. So actually, when you look at it now, the positioning is way better for Thorzane, because Thorzane has a lot of blocking. The York army can't get to the squishy units, and also he can retreat to a Health Fountain. Yeah, there's creeps there, but the Health Fountain is at his back, and you definitely want it at your back and not the Orc's back. So, because the Orc could retreat into the Health Fountain. Human probably can't do that so easily, but at least by being in this direction, the human can't then, the the Orc can't then take this health fountain, so positioning is quite good here. And I would say that positioning was assisted by scouting, so that's quite nice. We'll watch this little fight. I think this is probably coming towards the end of where scouting is really effective in this game, because after a certain amount of creep camps have been done, you kind of don't need to scout anymore. You know what's left on the map. You know sort of what can happen. So the effectiveness of scouting is less important. It's that mid game where it's really key. When that game, that sort of period that we've just coming to the end of now. I would say we're late into the mid game now, or maybe middle of the mid game, but that's pedantics, isn't it? So anyway, I'll speed this up a little bit and see if there is anything else we can mine from this game. So yeah, so of course when you TP, naturally you lose track of where your opponent is, but you can always make two assumptions: either they're going to come straight for you again, or they are going to go and creep. And based on what Thorzane knows, he again sent another scout here. I think he sent a hawk up here to check this earlier. So he's seen that there's an expansion. It's fairly advanced. Hawk knows. It's Hawk. We've got a Hawk in this game, but it's not Hawk who's playing. Thorzane knows that these creep camps are the ones that are left that Grubby has any access to. So when you look at that, what do you think Grubby's going to do? You've only got really three options: attacking or doing one of these two creep camps. So what we'll likely see now is Thorzane sending a unit up here to see if Grubby does this creep camp or if he moves over here. There we go. There's a hawk. He wants to know then, is Grubby attacking him? Is he defending his expansion? He's actually at the shop. So there you go. Those two options were either creep there or creep there, and Grubby actually didn't get the space to be able to do either, I don't think. I assume he didn't creep this. I didn't see him creep it yet. It's not done yet. But of course, what units your opponent gets also changes all these factors. Like Wind Riders, one of the reasons Wind Riders are really good is because they creep really fast, very quickly. And especially on this map where you've got an air unit that's on a health fountain. That can take quite a while to kill if you're just using an Archmage and a Water Elemental. But naturally, 4 Wind Riders and 2 ranged heroes can pick that off a lot quicker. So Wind Riders are really fast for creeping, which means you can creep things like this quite early, which is what he managed to do. Once he got his first 2 Wind Riders out, he went to creep this. So that's like effectively a game plan you can consider. What will your opponent do when they hit Power Spike? Sometimes they'll attack you, sometimes they'll attack you hoping that you will retreat so that they get map control and they can creep something big, which is, I think, sort of what happened with Grubby here. He attacked down here, but he had to TP back, which meant Thorzane had to TP back, which sort of reset the game. And because the Wind Riders are so powerful when they first come out, he had quite a power spike, so he was able to steal this red without Thorzane able to do much about it. But Thorzane, being pretty smart, realized that and expanded. So he didn't lose the red for nothing, which is nice. So yeah, as I said, I don't think there's much left to scout in this game because, excuse me, I've got a cold coming on. There isn't much left that Thorzane doesn't know for the rest of this game. He could just sort of stay near and sort of put pressure on Grubby, because Thorzane does have to act here because there is an expansion up. And one expansion versus one expansion, human versus orc, probably favours the orc, because things like Wind Riders, especially Wind Riders, are very expensive. So if both players have a high economy, it benefits the orc. So he does have to act before that becomes a big problem. So yeah, I don't think there's much left to learn from this game in terms of scouting. So we'll leave it at that. If you want to watch this, you can find this replay on warcraft3.info on their replay section. So yeah, I think we'll now go to some conclusions about what we've learned, and hopefully that will crystallize everything I've been discussing, and it won't just turn out to be me droning on about nothing. So here we have some conclusions. What did we learn from watching these replays, from Floss's game, from Hawk's game, and from Thorzane's game? Well, first thing, look at your opponent's inventory. This is a form of scouting. You will know where they've been, what you will have to do in the future, you will make decisions based on what you see in the inventory. In Floss's game, he didn't spot that his opponent had an Ankh, so that may have lost him the game, maybe not, I don't know. But look at your opponent's inventory, it is a form of scouting. That means you will have to learn all the map drops. This is something that will take a little time, I'm sure. I mean, you can just brute force it, but I don't want to give you homework that you don't want to do. You're here to have fun as well. It's a game. It's fun. But all I would suggest, at the very least, is at least pay attention to what's dropping at each creep camp when you're playing. So when you play Twisted Meadows, pay attention to what that 3 null creep camp drops. I can tell you for now, it's a level 2 permanent item. It's one of the circlets, the gloves, blah blah blah. Pay attention to what those golems drop at the Goblin Lab. And I can tell you it's a level, I believe it's level 4 permanent item, but it includes Sobi Mask, Devotion Aura, Ring of Regen, those permanent items that give you quite a nice buff, and also an XP tome. So you need to learn what the maps drop so that you know by looking at your opponent's inventory where they've been and what they've been doing on the map. That will give you a good sense of what they will do in the future. I mean, I know it's difficult in a real game to always just look at your opponent's inventory and then you can't just be like, hang on a minute, can I just pause the game while I think about where you've been? No, you can't really do that, but it's something you learn. You want to scout for something specific. We saw Hawk do that. We saw him scout for an expansion, and we want it more specifically for the timing of the expansion. So he knew when he could attack and when he needed to attack in order to do the most damage. It could have been lucky, but I don't think professional players get lucky like that. So have a plan of action. So in Hawk's case, he wanted to know when the expansion was up so that he knew when to attack it. You want to know what tech an orc is doing so that you know when the tech is going to finish and you can go and kill their beastries or whatever. So plan of action. Next, track your opponent's movements. We saw Thorzane doing this very well in the game versus Grubby, and it did well for him. I think you'll agree that if Thorzane, when the very one moment that Thorzane completely lost track of where Grubby was the moment where he had not a nasty creep jack, but it could have went badly. Then you can make sensible assumptions if you know where your opponents are. As I mentioned in the game with Grubby many times, of course, I have the privilege of not having to worry about, what I'm building back at base, making sure I'm building enough farms, making sure I'm not getting supply blocks, making sure I'm constantly producing, making sure I'm actually telling units to go where I need them to on the map, making sure that I'm microing well. I don't have to worry about any of that when I'm just watching the game. But of course, we're looking at scouting. So, these are not things you'll be able to do perfectly in a game, but they're things that you want to work towards. So you want to track your opponent's movements so that you can make sensible assumptions about where they are. As you get better at the game, those mechanical things like constantly making units, being able to just relax as your army attacks a creep camp while you think about something else, like whether that's building a lumber mill or, thinking you're planning your tech building placement, these sort of things. You get more comfortable letting things do what you've told them to, and then you can free up your mind to start thinking about things like, where's my opponent at, and can I make a plan for that? I think that a lot of players will get to a point in a game, new players I'm talking about, they'll have learnt perhaps a creep pattern, the build order. So right, everyone tells you, right, really important to get to level 3. That's a very important milestone in Warcraft 3. All the way up from the bottom level to the top level, having level 3 is very important. And so people will tell new players, get level 3. But then they say, well, what do I do at level 3? Well, what a professional player will have done is they'll have seen the game state in whatever form, and they'll make some movements based on that information. So scouting is the key to knowing what to do after your early game. So sensible assumptions. Force yourself to think about what your opponent's doing. Mention this briefly. This is difficult to do. I understand that, but it is something you want to focus on working towards, because it is how you should think about the game as you get better, is what is happening in the fog of war. So Hawk's game is a good example of that. He knew that it's quite likely that there's an expansion going on. He was able to scout specifically where it was and what time it was so that he knew then when to attack. And that was all because he was thinking, Lowlight's probably expanding. The timing of that would be roughly this. He'd want to attack the expo. He may have already cleared the expo with an Agent of War. I don't know or not, but he was thinking a lot about what options Lawlight had and what could have happened. So when he was scouting, it was more effective. If you are thinking about what your opponent is doing, you can more effectively scout, because often you'll have this where a new player will scout. They'll just send a unit to the opponent's base. Well, what use is that? Okay, you're against an orc, and they've gone 2 beastries and start making wind riders. I mean, you could probably have made that assumption, right? You didn't really get anything out of that. But if you think about where your opponent is on the map, you have a much better sense of what they're doing. Like, what if they're creeping across the map towards your base because their plan is to attack you? Or perhaps they're creeping in a pattern that means they will be able to expand and defend it. So, for example, on Concealed Hill, that would be Grubby creeping his expansion and then creeping the health fountain. That would be a strong position to defend your expansion. In actual fact, what he did is he creeped the middle red first when he had the opportunity. But, you know, there's various ways that could have played out, and Thorzane, through good scouting, was able to find out what that was. So he was able to think about what his opponent was doing, and his scouting was more effective. If you lose track of your opponent, creep carefully. We saw both Thorzane and Floss fall into this unfortunate pitfall. Floss could have pulled the creep back. He didn't know where his opponent was, so he could come out of the fog of war at any time. And don't be blaming your opponent for coming out of the fog of war and creep jacking you, because this is a funny thing. Is about a lot of people say, oh, in the old days there was a lot of accusations. People saying, oh, you're map hacking because you knew where I was. You came and attacked me. Do you not think maybe they were coming to creep that camp? Perhaps you were creeping it 10 seconds before they got there, and they wanted to creep it. They weren't hacking. They just wanted to go creep that camp, because the thing is with creep camps, they are resource on the map, so people go to them. So your opponent, if you don't know where they are, if you don't know if they're in a safe distance away, they could very well come out the fog of war and attack you, and you would never know about it. So, of course, you have other things like Windwalk Blade Masters, invisible units. They could have made sensible assumptions, like what we're discussing about where you were going, and then made some good assumptions that, hey, I'll just walk across this bridge. I saw my opponent go in this direction, so they might be creeping. I might creep check them. If not, then I'll creep it. There's like some good options for the MK player against Floss there. So that's the conclusion. So, what can we do about that? Some exercises that you can consider to do in your own time that might help you get better at scouting. Try a style that will give you lots of vision. Thorzane demonstrated this with the Beastmaster. He has a hawk, so that's pretty obviously you'll get a lot of vision. If you play this style quite a lot, you'll get a lot more familiar with what's going on your opponent's doing. If you're focusing on what they're doing, then you will see it more often, and some of that mystique will go away, and you'll this is something that new players quite often do, is that everything that's outside of their immediate vision is a black box. I don't know what's going on. And okay, I send a footman, I know exactly what's happening around that footman. But if you play a style where you have a lot of vision and you see pretty much everything your opponent's doing, you can take away that mental barrier that they're effectively just going to come out of the fog with something that you've not seen before, and that's just going to be how the game goes. You don't want the game to go like that. That's not how it plays at the top level. Oop, there's something updating. Let's close that. So yeah, I've lost my train of thought now. Thanks for that. Lots of scouting. Access to lots of scouting will make you better at scouting. So effectively give yourself a lot of vision in some easy way, and that'll be a good practice. Another way to do this: open the map editor and have a look at all the creep camp drops. As I mentioned earlier, you will have to learn the creep camps in order to effectively know where your opponent's been. So, of course, you can do this on the map editor. You just open the map editor, open up one of the ladder maps out of the folder that they're in, and you just click on the unit that has a creep. One of the creeps that has a little what's it called? The little visual indicator that they've got an item on them, and it'll show you what items they drop. And you can just look at that and on every creep camp, and then you'll just know. You can write it down if you want, but I would suggest doing it at least one map, and then when you're playing on that map, concentrate very carefully on playing the game around those items. So if, for example, in Turn a Stand, you want to go in, it's probably a difficult one to start with. I'd say Echo Isles is an easy one, because some of the creeps don't even drop items, so that makes it nice and easy. Know all the creep drops on that one, and then you can and then focus on, when you play that game, focus on sort of quizzing yourself when you see um, your opponent's hero. Click on them and try and guess what creeps they've done, like I did in that game with Floss. I looked at the MK's items and I made an assumption about his creep pattern. You do that in the replay, perhaps. If you can't do it in the game, save the replay, watch the replay back. From your point of view, the moment you see their hero after they've creeped for a little while, look at it and test yourself. That will, if you do that just 2 or 3 times, I guarantee you will know the map way, way better than you ever have done before, if you don't already. But there we go. Practice creeping at the edge of an aggro range. This was in reference to, if you lose track of where your opponent is, you want to be careful. This I think could have just saved Floss's game. If he'd pulled the creep, I don't think it would have been quite as devastating that he didn't know where his opponent was. It's a bit slower to creep this way, but it's a lot safer. So one of the advantages of scouting is that you know it's safe enough to creep faster, and you don't have to do this creeping at the edge of the aggro range. So you don't have to. But it's important to learn how to do it, and it's different on different creep camps. There's different sensible ways of doing it. You saw Grubby do it briefly on that red creep camp in the center. I don't know if my vision was on that as he was doing it, but he pulled it to the side and then picked it off with Wind Riders one at a time. That meant that sort of less units were attacking him all at once, rather than everything all at once. I'm trying to think if that happened in any of the other situations that we saw. No, I don't. Not that from memory in this game, but just the Grubby doing that in the center red camp is what you might have seen in this video. But practice that, because all it is you hit it with a ranged unit ideally, or just, aggro it with a melee unit, run the unit back. It's especially easy to do with the Archmage because you can just summon a water elemental in between you and the creep as it runs towards you. So that's quite neat, and then it will usually attack the creep depending on if it's a purge creep or not, but or if it's a poison creep which attacks one of every other. So yeah, in general, actually, it's just good practice to learn the creep AI in general, like for example the purge AI and how that works, or the fact that the poison murlocs or the poison gnolls will attack every unit within range until everything is poisoned. Or you have the ensnare ones, which attack anything that comes into its range while it's being engaged. That's how that works. So yeah, learn how to creep at the edge of the aggro range, because it's very safe. If you want to see somebody professionally do this, I saw Hawk stream probably about a week ago. He was doing this incredibly well with a paladin and rifles. He was effectively fighting his opponent as he was creeping and not really losing anything, because he was doing it at the edge of the aggro range. It makes such a big difference. Anyway, those are some exercises to think about what you could do to improve your results of scouting, because in the last case it's not actually anything to do with scouting, but it's tangential to scouting because it's based on scouting. So yeah, try these. I hope this was helpful. If you would like some questions answered about something specific, please do send me a replay. You find me on Discord. I'll put some links in the description, Twitter, or on the comments on this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.